Hello and welcome to the Flying Focus Video Bus. I'm Dan Handelman. I'm with Flying Focus Video Collective. I'm also with the group Portland Copwatch. Tonight we're going to talk about police accountability, a topic we've covered a lot on this show. I'm going to be talking specifically about the oversight system. The current oversight system, the Independent Police Review, was created in 2001. The group of community members that hears appeals of misconduct complaints is called the Citizen Review Committee, and they have the power to bring their appeals to City Council if the Police Bureau refuses to agree with their findings. Such a hearing has only happened 4 times since 2002 when CRC started meeting. We've covered every one of them. The first in 2003, the second in 2017, and the third in 2019, which was the first time the City Council voted to sustain a complaint. This most recent one that happened in 2021 was the first time the City Council unanimously voted to sustain a complaint, including the police commissioner. So there's a spoiler for you. Now you know the outcome of the show, but we're going to show how this came to be. And in addition to talking about the current oversight system and this specific case, I also want to update you all on the new system that's going to be coming down the pike. And hopefully this case can be an illustration about how to make an oversight system that functions well in the future. First, you're going to hear from the current CRC chair, Candace Avalos, a little bit about what the Citizen Review Committee is, and then we're going to jump back in time to the before COVID, when we were all meeting in the same room and I used my camera to record the meeting. The other meetings about this case, which has to do with a person who had her car stolen and a police officer refused to take a report from her, and then she lost the car. The other hearings were all held over Zoom, over the internet. After Chair Avalos talks about what the CRC is, you'll hear from the former chair, Kristen Malone, laying out a little bit about what this case is about, and then you'll hear from the appellant and the appeals process advisor, who is the volunteer assigned to help her navigate the system.
CRC is an 11-member volunteer council-appointed body, which is charged with advising the Chief of Police, Independent Police Review, or IPR, and the council on police policy, as well as hearing appeals of allegations that the police have violated their own policies.
There are 2 appealed allegations. The first is that Officer A would not take a vehicle theft report from appellant. The finding on that was exonerated. And the second is that Officer A did not adequately document a missing vehicle reported by the appellant, and that finding was unfounded.
The complainant, Ms. Lester, bought a car July 15th of 2018, and when she went to go buy the car from the previous owner could not find the title to the car. So the complainant and the seller went to the DMV to rectify this. The DMV gave the complainant application for title and registration, which clearly says under the instructions that you must provide a bill of sale, which was provided to the DMV. So there was no way she could have given the officer a bill of sale because it's required to get a title. The seller was told to apply for the application for title and registration. The complainant filed under DMV directive application for title and registration. The seller application for a replacement title because she couldn't find the title. The registration to the car, as was the case with many of us, was in the glove box of the car that was taken. So when the officer said she produced a handwritten bill of sale, that was not accurate. And this is more than just a handwritten. This is actually, as I went to DMV, the way the forms are, this is the receipt that you get from DMV when you fill out the form for title. So I went up to the information desk and asked to get a copy of the old paperwork, and I can confidently say I ignored the heck out of them. I asked for this form. What are you trying to accomplish? I'm trying to get a form. What do you want it for? I want it to show that this is a receipt. Yeah, that's the receipt you get to show the police in case you get pulled over or anything. I couldn't convince him to come this evening. That's from the DMV. So both the seller and the buyer went to DMV, and this is stamped on the bottom, 7/24/18. So the car is taken. She reports the car theft. I have it written down here. In August. So the first thing that's vexing is all the material that we all had to go through that have nothing to do with this. Nothing. All you need to know, they followed the directions of the DMV. She produced it. Unlike the officer's statement, it is not a handwritten bill of sale. She couldn't have. DMV had a handwritten bill of sale. Next, the Salem impound lot. He said that the previous owner had alerted the appellant about the lien on the car. Really? In your file is a claim of possession lien notice sent to the complainant. There was no phone, I don't even know where that came from. So on September 10th, 18, they came after the complainant for the payment of the car that nobody claims that she owned. All of this information was sent back to the complainant in a letter dated May 29, 2019. What was mailed back to her was original form 226, original form 515, original bill of sale. If you look at the directives, it says the complainant provides documents from DMV indicating process of transfer of title.
At any point, did the officer say anything about contacting a sergeant or anyone above the officer's level about getting a report?
I asked him, and he said, they're going to say the same thing. And I said to him, well, I'm not sure what else I could give you except for, but the yellow paper is, which is where you go to pay, get it put in your name, and you wait for a title. That's the paper. Anybody who, prior to the new paperwork, anybody who goes to license register the car gets this yellow paper. That's all you get. So it's that pending for a year, and then I got all the paperwork back from the DMV. But still, I mean, I paid to have the car put in my name. That's what this is. If I would have just had all the paperwork, then maybe, I'm not really sure what anybody else other than myself could give them for this yellow paper. Because this is all they give you at the DMV.
Did the officer ever talk about contacting the seller of the vehicle?
No, and I explained to him that the tags were expired, that I was afraid if it got impounded, then what do I do?
One of the interesting things about this case is how long it took to go through the system. The car, as you may have heard, was bought in July 2018, stolen in August 2018, and the complaint was filed in early 2019. The hearing that you're watching now is held in December of 2019. So the next person you're going to hear from is the commander of the officer, who's Commander Tasha Hager, who retired from the Bureau in August of 2020 before this case made it all the way to City Council. And you're going to hear her very bureaucratic reasoning for not accepting the paperwork that the complainant said she had.
I looked at, in the report, There was some deviation between Officer A saying that he thought he had that he may have had a handwritten bill of sale, and what the appellate said that she provided, which is provided in the case document, which is not yellow because I have a photocopy of it, but what you have. So I looked at that, and I just to give you some idea, when I review these, I tend to do a full review before I read the investigator's finding, simply because I want to make up my own mind based on the information that's provided in the investigation. I do a review of all the interviews that are done, et cetera, to come to my own conclusion before I read the finding. The important piece, I mean, the real distinction here is whether the piece of paper that was provided, and I believe that could have been what was provided. It is handwritten. It's not a bill of sale, but it is written in hand. It's not typed out. And so, you know, to me, I looked at it and it was kind of an either or. If that's what was provided, does that provide the officer a basis to take a stolen report based on our policy? And the answer is no. That was my conclusion prior to reviewing prior to looking at what the detective had to say. That piece of paper does not indicate that there is a transfer, that it has transferred. It is what this notice of transaction says. It's basically a receipt saying, I have applied to have this done. Not that has been concluded and has occurred. And I think it's a little, I'm going to deviate just a little bit outside the process, because I think it's important for the committee to understand why we're stringent. And when the officer says to the appellate, I would get in trouble if I took a stolen car report from you because he would be violating policy. And from his perspective, if she does not provide proof and he takes the report, he is violating policy. Because the policy says the owner will provide proof that they own the car. And the reason that's important is if we don't require that, it pretty much means anyone can report any car stolen that they want to, because we wouldn't be requiring some sort of proof. We want to be very sure that when we're dealing with the occupants of a vehicle that has been reported stolen, that it is a legitimate stolen car. Oftentimes on those stops, they become high-risk stops. There's multiple officers that are involved in that. Officers will pull their weapons. People who are in that car find themselves in handcuffs in the back of police cars. And if it's just a mistake, or we shouldn't have taken that report, if we end up being in a position where we should not have taken that stolen car report, then the citizen who ended up in the back of our car in handcuffs, who's now traumatized by that experience, my heart breaks, because DMV is, to me, I look at this as a complete failure of DMV in how they did things. And I'm not sure, you know, or in their explanation of what the process is. Typically, you have to have title before you can transfer title. So if you're applying to get a title, you actually can't transfer it yet. It does not sound like DMV probably did their job, but that doesn't really translate into Officer A not doing his.
And subsection H says, in situations that do not meet the previous criteria, officers must contact a detective or sergeant for authorization to accept a report of a stolen vehicle. So under the directive, there is a mechanism for an officer to take a report of a stolen vehicle, even if there is not sufficient proof of ownership. There's no indication in the record that Officer A attempted to contact a sergeant, or so it says, let's contact a detective or a sergeant for authorization, and if they're not available, to contact a supervisory sergeant. There's no indication that that is something that the officer looked into. If there is a document from the DMV, might not fall under A through G, but some indication that there was a transaction and that there is something in process, why would that officer not get in touch with the sergeant?
So that's a little bit hypothetical, because you're asking me to put myself in his mind and answer a question. I can't answer that for him. I can say that particular piece You know, the only way you can take a stolen report outside of the reasons that are listed is with permission, which is why you have to get it if you're going to. And that is it would be, I couldn't even give you a case scenario where that would happen. It is the catch-all that we put in there for something that is so far outside the box that we didn't think about it. In this particular incident, I mean, and I don't work for DMV, but I do know that in order to transfer title, you have to have title. So when the officer is looking at this, just having some paperwork from DMV doesn't actually make the vehicle yours.
I guess I'm wondering what the police bureau, when this directive was written, what the police bureau thought would go under this that is different from what the DMV actually does.
You know, I can't answer that either. And I think that for me, when I looked at this, that was when I looked at it myself, and that was my gut instinct, was that form itself, if I were standing in that officer's shoes, that form itself would not convince me that the person who was presenting it to me was the owner. Because I could have, at the time, walked into the DMV, taken that form, filled it all out myself. I could find a timestamp, and I could present that to a police officer, and how would that officer know that that was actually coming from DMV?
That's not part of the process of the transfer of the title?
It probably is. But the problem is that it is not transferring title. So this is not proof of ownership. That's what this is saying, that it's a receipt.
This entire hearing took about 2 hours, and I'm giving you the very short version of it. The next thing that's going to happen is the CRC is going to take a vote about whether or not a reasonable person could come to the same finding that the commander did, and that's a very deferential standard that they've been saddled with since they were created, and it's caused a lot of people to quit over the years, in fact. So we're hoping the new board that gets set up under what was called Ballot Measure 26217 does not have to defer to the police bureau. In fact, in theory, according to the way it's written into the charter, the new board will be able to make the decision on their own without having to even have the police bureau look at the case.
We're going to review these findings using our standard of review, which is, it is the responsibility of the Citizen Review Committee to determine whether a Portland Police Bureau finding regarding a complaint is supported by the evidence. A finding is supported by the evidence when a reasonable person could make the finding in light of the evidence, whether or not the reviewing body agrees with the finding. If we challenge a finding, we will recommend a finding in its place. Any of these findings could be accompanied by a debriefing, which would involve the superiors of an involved officer talking about the incident and providing instruction as to how the situation may have been handled better.
What I'm seeing here is an encroaching cynicism on the part of the police. It's saying we get so many fake calls, we just can't believe that this person did what they said they were doing. Now, we can't afford to do that in a society. We can't afford to have police officers getting cynical about these things. It's the boy who cried wolf story, right? At some point, the person's going to be telling the truth, and they're not going to believe them because they've heard so many people who lied. So I find that very frustrating and discouraging because we want to see a police force that's free of corruption, brutality, and racism, and is doing its job in the public. But when they get so cynical, it's very hard to see that happen.
Wow, that commenter was really smart. Oh, yeah, that was me. So the next thing that happened, I'm going to not show you this because it'll take too long. The Citizen Review Committee voted on a very tight 4-3 vote to sustain this allegation that the officer should have taken a police report. And that went back to this police bureau, who then said they disagreed. They didn't want to have that finding, so they came back for what's called a conference hearing the following August. And by that time, the existing chief of police, Danielle, was gone, and Chief Chuck Lovell had taken her place.
I will state the original finding. So it was originally that Officer A would not take a vehicle theft report from the appellant, and this was under procedure and directive 630.61, stolen vehicles, and the original finding was exonerated. But after the hearing, the CRC voted 4-3 to challenge the finding to make it from exonerated to sustained on that first allegation.
I was thoroughly briefed on this read through the summaries, and where I came down in this situation, looking at all the facts, is I landed on a not sustain with a debrief. I know the previous was exonerated and then the CRC finding was sustained, but I came in with not sustained with the debrief. And the reasoning is, I feel like with what was presented to the officer at the time, he would not have been able to actually verify proof of ownership and be in a position where he could have taken that stolen report. I know there was some dispute over what was presented, but even in the complainant's statement of what was presented to the officer, that would not have allowed him the ability to take a report because it's not considered acceptable proof of ownership by DMV. So I felt like it's not proper to sustain him on something that is not outside of our directives, but I do feel there's potential for a debrief to talk about maybe some additional follow-ups or questions he could have done, maybe attempts to contact the complainant back that would have maybe prevented the complainant from ending up in a situation where her vehicle was towed and she incurred those fees.
The officer wrote when he was questioned by internal affairs, it said he was handed a handwritten note, a yellow handwritten note. This is a notice of transaction submitted. It is yellow, but it's stamped. There is a stamp from the DMV on here. So this is not a handwritten bill of sale, and it's not a piece of paper that somebody can just go in there and pick up. At the hearing, I submitted the letter from the Department of Transportation dated May 29th, 2019, where they are writing to her that she can't, because of the mess up, that she can't proceed with this. And it says at the bottom that they're returning the original Form 226, the original Form 515, and the original bill of sale. So the DMV had the bill of sale. There was no way that she could have given any officer a bill of sale because it has to be submitted to the DMV at the time. She asked the officer to call the supervisor when she gave this because this is all she had. They actually caught the car thief, Chief, in Marion County. And you know how hard it is to find a car thief. They could not prosecute him because there was no stolen vehicle report on the car. So not only is this woman out money, public safety was not served, and Marion County was not happy about that.
And I think there was proof at the hearing, and also again, the appellant's APA said that the bill of sale is required to be submitted to the DMV in order to start this process. So in this situation, the appellant could not have had in her possession the notice of transaction submitted and the bill of sale. So if we're talking about a question of what documentation the appellant had and presented to the officer, there was sufficient proof that the appellant submitted that documentation to the DMV. She did not have a bill of sale because that documentation was submitted to the DMV in order to get the receipt, the notice of transaction submitted.
My concern is the not calling the supervisor. I take copious notes when I'm going through this stuff, and I can't, obviously I don't have the case file anymore, but I wrote in quotes, won't take a report because it's, and I in quote, not in her name, unquote. She said to him, in quotes, can't you talk to your supervisor, in quote. The response from the police officer was, no, the car's not in your name, and he will tell you the same thing I am telling you.
The reason behind the restrictions on taking a stolen vehicle report, and that it could be used offensively and people can make false reports and it poses a danger, and we understand that. But you have the situation where you have a hypothetical person down the road who might suffer some hypothetical harm
versus an individual talking to an officer who has actually suffered an actual harm.
So this hearing, the conference hearing, was also 2 hours long, and I cut a whole bunch out. And the CRC decided not to accept the not sustained with the debriefing or insufficient evidence finding that the chief proposed, and instead they voted again for a sustained finding of 6 for, 2 against, and 0 abstaining.
So with a vote of 6-0, this motion passes. Therefore, CRC maintains their finding of sustained. So in that case, again, Chief Lovell, typically we would have, I guess you would have had like your final decision. It sounds like you want to continue to think about it.
While April's still here, I just want to let her know that, it's never our goal to see, community members harmed or just not be able to get the service that they need, from the police bureau. So that I just want to apologize to her.
So the way city code is written, the next step would normally have been, assuming the chief rejected the finding, which he eventually did, was to take the case to the city council for the final vote. And the chief decided instead to take the case back and do more investigation. And we'll hear a lot more about that in part 2. And I've talked earlier in the show about the new system that's supposed to come in and replace the Citizen Review Committee. There's a lot of kind of controversy because the Independent Police Review staff at this point doesn't know when they're going to end their jobs. There is supposed to be a commission that's going to be appointed to design the new system. They have 18 months to do that. This show is being presented in June of 2021, and that means that if they haven't gotten started yet, by the time you see the show, we're not going to have a new review system in place until at least mid-2023. So that's why it's important to keep an eye on this existing system and think about how the way that this case went through could be illustrative of how the new system could avoid these problems. Thank you, and tune in for part 2 next week.